Alright, everyone. It is another episode of the Demons from Outer Space. God damn it. I actually don't really have any idea what episode number it is. In my heart, I kind of want to say it's episode 127, but I'm not sure at all. As always, I'm sure Dylan will try to correct me. But,
you guessed it. You guessed it was what now?
127.
127. Well, let's just see, shall we?
It's always a frightful experience while you go and figure out what the actual number is, because I don't know if I've made a total fucking ass of myself, or I was either just a little off, or I was right on the money. But you know, I think
this is 127.
Holy fuck! Sometimes I'm right on the money. So you know what, listeners? Fuck you. No, as if anybody in the comments is like calling me out on that. And nobody ever actually did. I was calling myself out on it. So realistically, I was taking out my own shit on you. So I apologize for that. I don't want to make this an abusive podcaster-listener relationship. So I just want to apologize for that now. So Dylan, all that real life horror aside, and uncomfortable stuff aside, why don't we get into some truly great, fictitious horror and macabre stuff with a classic fucking horror movie. One that there's a lot to say about it, but for me personally, it's just a huge, lifelong favorite, very influential to me in many of my different creative and personal pursuits. I don't even know if I introduced you properly. Did I introduce you properly? Like Dylan McCandless, Super DM64. He's here. He's ready to discuss things.
I don't know. I don't know if you did or not. I mean,
it's so mechanical, right? Yeah, it's.
I mean, it's episode 107. They know what's going on.
No, it's 127. You fuck, not 107. We did that. We did that a long time ago.
Did I say 107?
You said 107. Yeah.
Fuck. You know what I mean?
I got the idea. Yeah.
We're in the triple digits. If they don't know that I'm the other person on this podcast by now, then well, I mean, I guess this could be the first one they've ever listened to.
Every podcast is somebody's first podcast, just like that Stan Lee quote about comic books. Maybe not. Probably not. This is probably not the first podcast somebody's ever listened to, but ever as in the general idea of podcasting. Maybe one of ours, but certainly never general podcasting.
Yeah, it's a frightening concept, especially when I consider how many of these I've phoned in.
Indeed. Well, let's try and make this one that's more zesty tonight, because we are talking about, again, one that's a bigger deal, again, at least to me. So, Dylan, what horror movie are we going to tonight to continue on our long train of 80s gore fest that we're going to talk about until we get to Halloween?
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about last week we did vampires. We brought vampires into the 1980s, and tonight we're gonna do the same thing with werewolves, because we're talking about an American Werewolf in London.
Oh my god!
Fucking movie.
1981. That's the year, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So, American Werewolf in London. I saw this when I was way too young, probably when I was like 6 or 7, and I remember it scaring the crap out of me. And the thing that really scared me about it was the fact that the werewolf was shown so little, but whenever you saw it, it looked super scary and super realistic. So it always jumped out to me. I distinctly remember being at my cousin's house one time and seeing the bit where David first gets attacked, and it just sticking with me forever. Whenever I'm outside in anywhere that remotely resembles a Scottish moor, I imagine that might happen, and it fills me with dread and terror.
Do you go many places that resemble Scottish moors?
More often than you would think, and more often than I probably should, but that's besides the point. So this is a big one for me, and throughout time, it has stood up as a consistently frightening film in those respects. But one thing that I appreciated more as I got older is it's a wonderfully funny film as well. And it's, in my opinion, the best blend of horror and comedy ever put to screen, even amongst the ranks of Ghostbusters and Gremlins and any other thing that you can think of that attempts to do that. I think that this is the best example of it above all those, because it's so wonderfully understated about it in both the horror and the comedy aspects. And as I said, it went on to influence me both personally and creatively. I think my sense of humor has certainly been influenced by the way this film mixes the comedy and the gore and the horrible dark themes of mental anguish and trauma and all that kind of stuff, and also the way they handle the werewolf. Werewolves have always been a personal fascination of mine. The mythology around them, the way they've related to our actual history, and of course all the different movies that have cropped up in our history that I've seen and enjoyed based on them. And this is, again, probably the favorite. Without a doubt, this is the favorite, definitely. Best werewolf movie for me. So, that's a big endorsement with a lot of baggage around it. So, how do you want to follow that up?
Better than Silver Bullet with the rocket-powered wheelchair?
Well, it's got a better-looking werewolf at the very least. And I think that goes a long way.
I don't know. I'm always hearing shit about how the effects in Silver Bullet don't look that great. And I'm like, the transformation stuff, no, not really. But the werewolf itself, I think, looks pretty fine.
But compared to an American Werewolf in London, though. You see? That's where we dip,
I mean, I like the fact that it's two-legged, but we can get to that later.
Sure,
Yeah.
just design-wise, I guess... that can be a preference, but I just meant like effects wise. Realistically, it's better in American Werewolf in London.
Yeah.
In every respect. But yeah, how do you feel about it?
I like it a lot. I don't have the overwhelming nostalgia that you do. I didn't see this movie when I was 6 or whatever. I don't remember when I first saw it actually, but it was quite a bit later, and then I didn't really get to revisit it all that often. I recently acquired a physical copy of it, so now I can watch it whenever the fuck I want. And so that's a game changer. But yeah, I've always enjoyed it. I think it's a very well made movie. Some flaws here and there that we can talk about, but overall,
Definitely.
incredibly solid.
Yeah. There are definitely some things that don't hold up about it because of when it was made, and I think that's one thing about it that I've noticed a lot more as well as I've gone on, is that it's distinctly of the time, and that's crucial to why it works so well, but also to why some of the things just don't hold up now. Like if you were sitting in a movie theater in 1981, wouldn't question it. But sitting in my room in 2017, definitely questioned it.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of the character motivations in that respect. But we can talk about all of that in the dirty details. But yeah, I think overall this is just... It's the werewolf movie that hits all the right notes, Even in the mythology. Mm-hmm. I think the mythology is just the smartest and the most simple and it makes the most sense. And the way they approach it is done in such a way that not only does it make sense, but it's interesting and unique despite being so simple and similar in a lot of respects to what we've seen before. But again, the slight differences make it unique and stand out from all the other movies. And when you go back and look at werewolf movies retrospectively, this one stands out because, this is the one where everybody who's been killed by a werewolf walks the earth in limbo, which is a killer idea. I've been saying that a lot this month, and I haven't been meaning it as a pun. It's just a thing I've been saying. But it's been coming off as an unintentional pun, and I don't want that to suddenly become a thing. But yeah, so let's go back to the very beginning here. This is John Landis movie. This is my John Landis movie. This is the one I always go to. Is like, John Landis directed an American Werewolf in London, so he's God's gift to humanity, in my opinion. But how do you feel about John Landis in general? Have you seen a lot of his movies? Because outside of this, I'm not super widely versed. And I've probably seen stuff that he's directed that I couldn't even remember that he directed. Like, you know what? I'm pretty sure he directed Beverly Hills Cop 3, which I have seen. But but I'm not even sure if he did direct that. I'm only kind of half sure. So, how about you?
Yeah, I've seen some more of his stuff. He's a little bit more known for comedy, obviously. The Blues Brothers is obviously a very famous one.
Never seen that in full. Only seen extended bits and pieces.
Animal House is one that I've only seen once, but so I don't really remember much about it. But it's pretty well regarded in the history of
right.
comedic films.
Yeah, I've never seen that in full either.
Eddie Murphy's Coming to America.
Also never seen that.
You're right, he did do Beverly Hills Cop 3. I've seen...
Not a good movie, by the way, but when I saw that, I was like, oh, well, it's fine. He did American Werewolf in London, so...
I've seen reviews of what I think is his first film, Schlock, back in, like, the golden age of that guy with the glasses, you know? But, let's see, there's something else that I'm forgetting. Oh, yeah, he did a section of the Twilight Zone movie. So
yeah, the one where people died.
Yeah, so that's always good.
He's got a very distinct reputation in Hollywood, and his approach to filmmaking is always very distinct, and this movie is, in my opinion, the best example of it, because he has this very specific idea with mixing the comedic and the horror elements, and I think he goes about executing it wonderfully. That's what I think is so impressive about this movie, is that it doesn't feel like it leans on anything or it bends too far in any one direction at any point. It walks the lines just perfectly, pretty much all the way through, of horror, comedy, drama, just general, all the stuff you need for this kind of story, and it does it really well. It nails it particularly in the beginning with how we are introduced to everything. You know, like we start off on just the shots of the Scottish moors. Or they're not the Scottish moors. It's in northern England. So whatever the hell that's called, they're moors though. They say that in the movie, and you know that's kind of, it creates a certain amount of ambiance. And
don't they call it Wales at one point? Or doesn't somebody mention Wales?
I'm pretty sure somebody mentions Wales, but I don't think they're in Wales. I don't think Wales is north of England. I'm pretty sure they're in... You know what? They're definitely in England, because remember, Dr. Hirsch drives there, like halfway through the movie, and he's able to drive back to London in the same day. So I would imagine that it's in England. It's just, you know, up in the north where there's a lot of rural shit. And werewolves, apparently.
Yeah. That's the thing about European countries, though. You can just hop in your car and go to Germany for the day, you know, and come back. Crazy.
Well, I mean, I'm from England, though.
I mean, depending on where you're at, obviously. But, like,
right.
yeah, a lot of those European countries are very small and close together.
Right.
So, yeah, you fucking... I'll drive to fucking Scotland. I'll be back for dinner. You know,
but I don't
you know?
think Scotland's north of London. I'm
I don't know.
almost positive.
I'm not looking at a fucking map. I'm just, you know, saying.
Listen, I'm just saying I'm pretty sure that it's still in England. Because in the beginning, when David and Mark are... his name is Mark, right? His friend?
Shit.
See, now I'm questioning it. I'm going to look it up real quick because I really love him. He's awesome. But David, I remember David's name a lot more because it gets shouted a lot more.
It's Jack. His name's Jack.
Jack is his name. See, now I remember instantly. I don't know why I thought his name was Mark. See, I'm such a fan of this movie, but I couldn't even remember one of the major characters' names. So when David and Jack are talking towards the beginning about the fact that they're on their summer vacation, it seems, or some kind of vacation following high school, and they're going kind of gallivanting around Europe, and they're starting in northern England, and their plan is to eventually get to Italy, where they're going to meet a bunch of girls. Santa Lucia. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it's northern England. Anyway, So about all that stuff at the beginning, though, when they're just shooting the shit, walking along all this creepy scenery, and also when we were introduced to all the creepy scenery, we had that awesome Bobby Vinton version of Blue Moon, which is this beautiful, somewhat melancholy, somewhat uplifting song that I think matches the movie perfectly. Because they play Blue Moon 3 times, and I think they're all at very distinct thematic points. You know, there's that. Then it's halfway through the film when David first turns into a werewolf, and it's the kind of jazzy version by the Marcells. And then there's the third time at the very end when it's by Mecco, and it's more of a kind of modern, upbeat, poppy version. And I think that they're all very distinct moments, and for different reasons. But I like the one at the beginning because of the tone it sets up for all the setup for the film itself. But one thing I want to ask you right up at the very start, then, to get talking about the story, is we kind of have them wander into this town, just kind of because it's there, because they're just gallivanting around, and presumably they're just trying to find a place to spend the night. And this town is in the midst of this, town-wide conspiracy covering up this werewolf. How did you feel about the whole town conspiracy side of this?
I thought it made perfect sense. I mean, it's sort of a callback, interestingly enough, not to werewolf movies, but to sort of, in almost every Christopher Lee Dracula film, there's always somebody comes to Transylvania. They go to like a bar. They mention the castle, and then everybody in the bar gets quiet.
It's more Dracula than it is a werewolf movie, isn't it? Yeah. Although I guess it is kind of like The Wolfman, where Larry goes into the shop with Gwen, and she tells him about the werewolf lore. It's a little bit like that, but it's more distinctly Dracula. You're right.
It's different because in this town, and this is what's Dracula-esque, everybody, nobody wants to talk about the werewolf to outsiders. They're very secretive about it. They're very close-lipped. They're obviously scared shitless. They got occult symbols in their bar to protect them. In the Wolfman, every fucking person he goes to is spouting off this fucking poem. Like, nobody believes in this thing.
Right. It's just kind of arbitrary. Yeah. But in this, it's... Well, I say conspiracy, and I wanted to ask you about it because I think it's one of the things that's really cool about the movie. But one thing I almost kind of wish we got more information about, because there's a lot of covering up going on to get David to be in London and then released so he can go on his iconic rampage through London as his werewolf. And
I don't know that it even becomes a conspiracy until they get attacked, and then they're covering up saying that like a killer attacked them and everything. The rest of it feels like,
well, because it's somebody who's not from there. That's the problem, and then you're bringing out all these you're bringing in all these outsiders, because the people who just get killed by the werewolf in East Proctor or around there, it's easy as hell to cover that up as just whatever.
Well, I get the feeling, this is obviously some remote part of northern England, probably not a whole lot of outsiders coming in and out, and probably an area that has been dealing with this werewolf shit for a very long time, and so it's just sort of a part of their lives, and then these people from the outside come in, and, they can't be like, hey, watch out, there's a werewolf out there. Like, nobody's going to believe that, It's interesting. It's an odd situation, and I don't know what you do in that situation if you're one of those townfolk. And there's even a lot of debate amongst themselves about it. When Jack and David leave the bar, there's a lot of the bar maiden is all like, we can't just let them leave, and then there's a whole debate going on about how to handle. I wouldn't call it a conspiracy as much as fucking scared shitless people trying to survive.
Well, they have to make it a conspiracy so that way everybody doesn't get wrapped up in it. And I think part of why they do it the way they do it, we see, because of what happens with David, somebody from the outside survives and becomes a werewolf themselves, and then goes into London and wreaks havoc. And I would love to. We'll talk about the fact that they are potentially making a sequel to this or a remake or whatever, but I would sort of like to see some follow up to this to see how people react to Werewolf David's little rampage through Piccadilly Circus at the end. Was that covered on the news? Did any cameras get that? Because there was a huge car accident around it too. That was the one big thing I noticed about it, was more people were killed by the horrible car accident around the werewolf coming out of the movie theater than were actually killed by the werewolf. It was like a 16-car pileup, and somebody gets. There's a moment where a bus hits one car, and then somebody goes flying out of the bus and gets hit by another car. It's crazy. But I think that the townsfolk are trying to avoid something like that by keeping it all covered up. But I think what I want to know about it is why they don't just kill the werewolf. Is it because it's somebody that they know and like, and they don't just want to murder them? Why do they wait until the werewolf attacks somebody like they did this time and go out and kill them? Have they just been? I guess they've just been scared. But I kind of wonder about all that. And Dr. Hirsch definitely does. He goes fucking asking about it. So I kind of wondered about all that. So I would have liked to have gotten more. Do I think it's necessary? Nah, not really. But the fact that I wonder about it, I think, is just a testament to how interesting it is. And in a horror movie like this, you want interesting stuff to keep you engaged when the monster is not on screen ripping people apart, right?
Right.
And I think this movie, more than many, many others, succeeds at that. Would you agree?
Certainly, yeah.
So yeah, I think all of that works wonderfully, and I really like that for a second they're okay with the outsiders. Like, everybody in this movie, in addition to being funny in their own right and being good in a horror movie, they just come off as real people as well in good certain respects. In that scene where the one guy is telling the joke about all the United Nations representatives on the plane, and everybody just kind of gets into it, and David and Jack are debating about asking them about the pentagram. That's a moment where everybody feels like real people, regardless of the fact that that was made in the early 80s and we're in 2017 now. That holds up as a moment of genuine kind of, all right, everybody in this situation feels like they're really there and they're not just, actors delivering stilted dialogue. By the way, did you laugh out loud at that joke? I always laugh out loud at that joke.
I didn't, only because I've heard it before.
Did you ever laugh out loud at that joke in the context of this film?
No, because I think my exposure to that joke predated me seeing the movie.
Yeah,
I've heard that. I've heard that joke many times. If this movie had been the first time I had ever been exposed to that joke, I probably would have. But halfway through the joke, I already knew what joke he was telling. You know what I mean? So it was just sort of like, here it comes. Here comes the punchline. It's a good joke, though.
It is a good joke, and this was my first exposure to it, so I laugh out loud at it every time I see this movie. Because I don't know, it always gets the delivery of it always gets me. And just the way he says, and the Yang representative shouts, "Remember the Alamo," and chucks out the Mexican. It's just the delivery. It's perfect. And I also think another perfect thing about this movie is the pacing, the editing, everything that goes into that. Just the way it's structured. It's perfect. Because then a few seconds later, Jack is like, "What's that star on the wall for?" Silence. And then we're back to tense drama.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just one example of the perfect pacing and editing of this movie. I can think of one example of it that doesn't work. Do you want to know?
What's that?
When the werewolf is chasing the guy in the subway, it's really inconsistent how far away it is from him. because when we get POV shots of it, it seems way closer to him. But then when we get shots from the front of him, it seems like it's pretty far back in the subway, and he's got quite a bit of distance from it.
Yeah. I really like that scene, but I think
Oh,
what they
it's
should have done
amazing. Yeah.
I think they should have just kept it POV the entire time, and just chased him through those tunnels completely from
I
the werewolf
disagree. I think they should have
Until
cut
he
out the POV shots.
until he gets to the elevator. Do it like the what you call it, the big wheel ride from The Shining, where you follow Danny the entire time until he gets to where the twins are. We could have just been chasing that guy the entire time as the werewolf, because I'd rather have that effect of feeling like I'm the werewolf chasing the guy than just watching him running down a tunnel. Until you get to the part where he gets to the escalator and then right before he dies, or the part where the werewolf comes around the corner and you, I don't know. The point is, one or the other is what needed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, but I feel like the effect personally from the front works better because I like using my imagination of the werewolf just being on the cusp of the frame and what it's doing, because the movie does a lot of that and it's always very effective. I really like when the bums see it just off frame and, they're kind of looking and they're like, holy mother of God. It's and then you cut, you see the werewolf's face and then the train comes screeching past. It's perfect. And it's always done in such a way where you're never left going, oh, I didn't get to see the werewolf, fuck. Because the way it's cut is just so satisfying. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, certainly.
But yeah, no, I think there's plenty of examples of that particular element. But why don't we go back to the plot? Do you have any major complaints with either the setup or the characters as they're introduced at the beginning? So David, Jack, Alex. We can even bring it to minor characters like Professor Hirsch or whatever. But again, they're more minor. Jack, David, and Alex. There are three leads, which I like that Jack remains a lead throughout. And even though he's not out on screen nearly as much, in the middle and the end as he is at the beginning, his presence is felt throughout the film because of the impact that he's had on David. But these are obviously 1980s teenagers. There was certainly a big risk for them to come off as really unlikable douchebags that are super of the time and you just have, there's just nothing to them. They're not super developed. We don't get a lot of information about their backstories. I like that. Do you like that?
Talking about the main characters?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think you really need to know that much about their backstories because the whole story is sort of playing on this. It's similar to the original Wolfman in that it's sort of playing on a little bit of American xenophobia a bit, because here you have Americans going to a foreign land and encountering this monstrous thing.
It is, but it extends it, doesn't it? Because it's not just the scary supernatural stuff. It's also the very modern, metropolitan part of it, because he, that's the whole reason he goes to London. Is so that way we can get that context of, it's not just about, American boy goes to scary northern English village where he encounters werewolf mythology and then is attacked by one and is scarred by it. He then goes to London and recuperates and is exposed to early 80s London and early 80s British society and the impact that influence has on him while he's going through this traumatic experience. And to lay more things at his feet, a super hot English nurse who has a thing for him, but also feels super bad for him. I think she's the most problematic of the three leads, character-wise. Would you agree?
Oh, okay. All right. I just looked her up because she looked familiar to me, and
yeah, I also think she's in something else. What is it?
Well, a couple things. She's in Logan's Run. She's in apparently she's in the Avengers somewhere. I don't know what she is in that.
I would. However old she would be at that point, I don't think I would remember her in the
Oh,
Avengers.
she must be the old ass version of what you call her, Agent Carter, because she's also listed as being in Captain America: The Winter Soldier.
Yeah, but
Unless she's one of
no,
unless she's
that's
one
not
of the
possible. She's probably one of the Shield heads.
yeah, I just thought of that. She must be one of those
Yeah,
the
because Agent Carter is played by the same actress who played her as young,
yeah, just tons of makeup. Yeah, that's
and
right.
she's also not in the Avengers, so
Yeah, yeah,
except in like stock footage.
you're right. So yeah, Ginny must. The actress's name is Ginny. She must be one of the Shield bitches. That makes sense.
She's really good in this, and she's really good because she's one of your more kind of straight characters. She's not cracking a lot of jokes. She's more there to kind of appreciate good humor. You know what, she does make some really good kind of dry jokes. Her humor is certainly more British, and I guess that's intentional to have her clash with David, who's more sort of uh, over the top personality American, you know.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
I think that
answer your
clashes
question
well.
about the answer your question about the way the characters are all introduced and the
Yes.
setup of that. No, I don't have any problems with that. In fact, I think the first portion of the movie, from the opening credits through to the werewolf attack on the moors, is one of the strongest sections of the film.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree. If not the strongest, because I think it just establishes this very particular mood that's not common for horror movies, while still being very functional, just as all those traditional ones are.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And then once you get to the famous transformation sequence, from there till the end of the film is pretty good. And then it's the stuff in between those two sections that maybe a little less. So, a little bit of some second act blues going on here, I think. But
Yeah, well, let's talk about that then, because I was just referring to some of that with Alex. Because I think it's all their relationship is odd, and it's odd mostly on her end. Do you agree? His end, I totally get it, but
right, yeah,
but her end, I'm sitting here going, this is a high school kid or just out of high school kid. Maybe he's legal, especially in England. He probably is. It's probably 16.
do we know that they're high school or right out of high
We don't
school?
know that for a fact, but that's the impression that I get, given how they talk to each other at the beginning and what they're talking about.
Because some people do the whole backpacking through Europe thing when they're like in college. So
Oh, and I didn't get that sense at all, especially because David's at home doing homework in his dream. So
that's
maybe
true.
he could be doing that as a freshman in college, but I don't get the sense that he's any older than that even. I get the sense that this is... Because I also get the sense that he's supposed to be just on the cusp of entering a new part of his life. And in a story like this, usually that's... I've just graduated high school, I'm moving on to college or something else, and that's when this horrible thing happens to me that's going to either shape the rest of my life or end it. Uh,
But even then, I mean, that's a dream sequence. I mean, I still occasionally have dreams that I'm still in high school. Uh,
you make a good point. But I think that's just the sense that I get. So we don't know for a fact, though. But
yeah,
my
we don't know
point
how old
is,
he is. What's more concerning to me is that he's clearly a nut job.
yes, yeah, that's really every time, because she has the same line throughout. I'm torn between feeling between feeling really sorry for you and devilishly attracted to you, and and every time they question his sanity, it's covered up by making out. Now I think
Maybe
it's intentional.
maybe it's part of the werewolf thing. Maybe it's a bit of the old animal magnetism
There's
at play.
definitely some of that going on.
But if that's the case, it needs to be explained. Because I mean,
Yeah.
even first bringing him home from the hospital right after he gets out might be considered a little odd. But at that point, fine, whatever. But later on in the movie, when she has serious reason to think that he might be the one doing all the killings, and she's like, laughing over the phone with the doctor, like, he's here, he's very enthusiastic. I'm like, bitch, like,
Yeah,
he,
yeah.
he could be slitting your throat right now for all you know. Like
Yes.
have a little concern.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I questioned all of that hardcore this time in particular, going back to
That being
this.
said, it's definitely a script issue because her performance is great.
Yeah, no, she's really good. And I think that she's so good that I think that she gets that that's problematic and is playing it off as somewhat not sarcastic, but she, again, that dry wit of hers is just, she, every line that she delivers, it feels like it could be sarcastic or slightly ironic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, I also think that part of that, even on the script level, is somewhat intentional. This is a this isn't even like the worst horror movie romance that I've seen that is clearly built on emotionally unhealthy pillars that only gets more and more so as the film goes on. That is just unbearable. And this isn't even unbearable to watch. It's just questionable. But I've seen way more questionable stuff in less self-aware contexts or somewhat intentionally ironic context. Because there's a lot of satire in this film, and I wonder if some of the, well, I probably shouldn't be getting involved with you, and I should turn you into the police, but I'm just gonna keep fucking you because you're hot, is to play on that. But I wish it was explained, like you said, because I think I think that there is some of, he is becoming a werewolf, so he's just kind of more into the moment to moment natural urges. Because when she goes in the shower and she's just like, perhaps you'd like to watch telly while I wash up, and he just kind of looks at her, it looks like a very it's a wolf stalking prey kind of moment. And then immediately after, when they're in the shower fucking, we hear Moondance playing. So I think that that's supposed to be like the werewolf is starting to take hold in that sense.
You know who else looked familiar to me watching
Who?
this movie? The young guy in the bar who's playing darts, the one who winds up going to the doctor when the doctor drives back into town to investigate. He's the one
Who's
that
he?
approaches him outside the bar. So I looked him up because he looked very familiar to me, and he's been in all kinds of things that I've seen, and I flew by I still don't know who he is in these things either, but I'm just looking at some of the movies he's been in. Okay, so he was in Gladiator, he was in the first three parts of the Caribbean movies, he was in Valkyrie. So I've seen this guy in things. He was in the 2010 remake of The Wolfman, interestingly enough.
Huh.
I've seen this guy in things.
Who was
but
he in that? Just like some supporting character that didn't matter?
I don't know. It's a good question.
Can you look it up? I mean, I thought you had his IMDb page open.
No, actually, I was just looking at his the results in Google for his name plus movies.
Well, never mind them. Doesn't matter. Everybody's really good in this. There is not a weak performance in this entire thing, no?
No, I don't think so. Nobody that jumped to me.
And I think maybe
maybe the people in the fake porn.
Yeah, no, but that's fucking clearly intentional. Because that's a porn that they shot for the movie. Like they're credited in the credits, and their names are all hilarious. It's like Georgia Bailey and all this kind of super like cliche porn names.
Yeah, it's very intentional, obviously, but
I think the two performances I could maybe grant you criticizing, and I think they're absolutely intentional.
He's a policeman in the Wolfman remake, it seems.
Oh, okay. There's
he's
lots
got
of them.
He's got a mustache, one of those comical hats that they used to wear.
That does not narrow him down at all, but again, whatever. So, what I was going to say, though, was that I think, what are their names? Harry and Sally? The couple that gets murdered by David on the first night. When they pop up in the movie theater, and they're like, you could put a gun in your mouth, or you could take some sleeping pills. Like, it's very obnoxious. But again, I think it's clearly intentional. Like, and maybe in that moment you can criticize, oh, they're overacting.
I actually really liked them.
Yeah,
in that scene.
I agree. I agree with you, but I think that's one. I think you could maybe point to that, but I don't think so.
I actually find them more obnoxious before they're murdered.
I didn't think so. I think that you could maybe make that argument after they've been murdered, because it feels like suddenly, like, the fact that they've been killed, they seem like they're on drugs. But again, I feel like that's intentional. Before that, they just seemed like a ditzy couple, which I thought was also intentional. It's a super cliche in one of these kind of things, and I think that was a way to bring the werewolf in, because they're also like, oh, we're gonna give our friend a right old scare, and they go off into these woods and then they just get fucking murdered.
That whole scene in the in the movie theater though is as far as comedy goes, probably my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah, it's really spot on.
That's most comedic because most of the movie is playing itself pretty straight, but there's jokes here and there, and it's sort of tongue in cheek. That's probably the one scene in the movie that I can think of where it goes full on into like, it's just a fucking hilarious scene, even though they're discussing like some really dark shit. It's laugh out loud kind of funny.
I think there's a lot of that throughout, though. Like, there's that moment where David's dreaming early on, and he keeps coming in and out of dream states, and he comes out of one, he sees Alex next to him, and he's like, oh, Alex. And she's like, have you dreaming again? He's like, yup. And she's like, all right, I've got just the thing. And then she goes to open the window to bring in sunlight. And then there's another one of those, like, werewolf mutant Nazis behind the curtain, and it stabs her, and she's dead. He's like, no, Alex! And then it comes to get him, and then he wakes up again. He's like, holy shit! So there's a lot of moments throughout, amidst the really dark shit, to make you go, yeah, but these are real people, and there are funny moments in dark shit in real life. That's the way things work. So I think it's more realistic than it is.
I didn't find that scene you just described to be particularly funny, though. Where's the joke there?
Well, the way it's cut. He wakes up and he goes, "Holy shit!" Almost just like it's mundane in his reaction to that. Because it's become mechanical for him. He's been waking up from these dreams over and over again, so he doesn't know where he's at anymore.
Okay, I guess I can see that. Now, that being said, the comedy doesn't always land 100% of the time, and the big example for me is the guy from Scotland Yard.
Oh, I thought you were going to point to him. I liked him, but okay, I can totally see that.
Like early on when you're first introduced to those two, and he like knocks the pans off the table, and there's just this extended scene of him picking up these pans. It's just this big break in the conversation, and I'm like, I don't know. For a movie that's very smart with its humor, most of the time it sticks out as this one like really just dumb moment that's just like, he knocked a thing over.
Yeah, it feels very Three Stooges, doesn't it? I don't feel like either one of the doctor or his superior would have tolerated that. Like, I feel like you would have, like, at that point, they would have been like, all right, you need to fucking leave. Like, you're clearly fucking stoned or drunk or something. You need to get the fuck out.
Yeah, and then the other scene where his partner walks out of the room first, and then he's still talking to them, and he turns around to walk out, and the door's shut, and he kind of pauses for a second, and like, it's just like this little awkward moment. It's better than the pans getting knocked over. It's more subtle. But it's still like, I don't know. After the first scene they were in, it still didn't land for me, because I was like, at that point, I just see them as a detraction to this movie. When the one gets his head bitten off, I'm like, no, bite the other one's head off. He was the annoying one.
Yeah, but he was also he was annoying and underexperienced, but he was also like, he was more like on to what was going on. Like early on when David's talking about all the inconsistencies with what he saw and what the police said, that guy is listening to him and being like, oh yeah, well he's clearly he seems rather reasonable, rather lucid, and he seems to be pretty convinced that something odd is going on here, so maybe we should look into it, even if, it's not a werewolf. And, his boss is like, shut up, you're a dickhead, which again, he's right, but
you know what? If anybody's going to be bumping into things and knocking things over, it should be the older guy, because I think it's funnier for the guy who's so like, stubborn and sure of himself to be the fucking bumbling idiot. It makes him more of a blowhard type character, where it's like he's this fucking bumbling idiot who does these like, has no coordination or whatever, but like he's very high-minded about like himself and like, it's obviously a killer. No way it was a wolf.
I can see that, but I think the idea of the younger character is just that he's inexperienced and nervous, and he's just kind of futzing around trying to do something with himself. So I think it's just all part of that characterization. So I think it's all just a matter of taste and whether or not you find that kind of character annoying or if the comedy works for you, and it worked pretty well for me most of the time. I didn't find that character super annoying. In fact, I liked him. But I can definitely see that, and I liked his boss as well. And I thought that when the werewolf does bite his head off, that definitely worked well for the kind of dynamic they were playing the whole movie. And I was and I felt a little bit like, oh shit, like I had forgotten that he died. So when that happened, I was like, oh fuck, I forgot that character that I've been seeing throughout the entire film dies right there. Wow.
Ultimately, you could probably do a cut of this movie with them not in it, and it wouldn't affect things at all.
No, they're not that important. I mean, yeah, but they are in scenes where stuff is going on, like when Hirsch is talking to, I think they're in the room, when Hirsch is talking to Alex on the phone. I'm almost positive. I could be wrong. Yeah, you know what? I think I am wrong, actually.
You could probably only have them in that one scene.
With David. Yeah, you got to have them there.
And it would probably even work better because it would just be there to establish the fact that the investigation's closed and that Scotland Yard isn't taking him seriously. And then they could walk out of the movie and never show up again, and it really wouldn't have any effect on anything.
Although I do also really like that bit where Dr. Hirsch is on the phone with his secretary in the midst of him talking to the cops, and she's like, Roger Matheson on the phone for you, sir, and he's like, now tell him I passed away, tell him an old war wound or something, just tell him I'm dead, because he just doesn't want to talk to this guy. I thought that was really funny. So I fight to keep for that scene just for that. I want Roger Matheson to stay in this movie. That's just a personal preference on my part. So I think the middle is, well, that because that's where all the character stuff is, and all the kind of dry humor is, and all the attempts at comedy are. So I think whether or not they land is going to depend on whether or not this movie works for you there. And I think it definitely landed for me better than it landed for you, because I was pretty consistently entertained throughout that middle half there. My only problem with it is just that the relationship makes zero sense on Alex's part, and she doesn't make any sense. And I'm left just scratching my head every time they're fucking. Like,
the best part of that middle section of the film is Griffin Dunn's character, the establishment of the lore in the film. When he makes his visits to David.
Absolutely.
And I like how every time he shows up, he's more decayed than he was the last time. That was a nice device.
Right. Well, what I really liked about all that is it's super ambiguous as to whether or not David is just going crazy or if it's actually happening. And at a certain point, I don't think it matters, but it seems to be that it's actually a supernatural manifestation of his dead friend.
Yeah.
The film certainly seems to lean that way. But you can still totally argue that David's just going crazy, even if he is actually a werewolf.
Mm-hmm.
Like the sheer effect of that could just be driving him crazy. Because again, more of it is just about, like, I like what you said earlier, the whole idea, this modern spin. It's not modern now, but it was modern in 1981. That modern spin on the xenophobic American horror story. Taking a bright American boy and dropping him in a foreign land and watching him torture and go into turmoil over the surroundings.
The more modern horror film to use xenophobia as a theme is Hostel, if you care for torture porn. But yeah, in terms of, that's definitely here, and I think it's in
not torture porn.
No, the xenophobic element is certainly here. And also in The Wolfman, even though technically his character isn't supposed to be American by birth.
Right. That is odd. But again, he grew up in America largely, so it makes sense.
He's an American guy. Come on.
Yeah, right. Lon Chaney Jr. That whole movie is Lon Chaney Jr. hanging out in Europe, and he gets attacked by a German Shepherd, and then he gets hair, and that's it.
Yeah, pretty much.
So let's talk. We could talk about that as well. This is a direct remake of The Wolfman, pretty much. It's beat for beat almost.
In certain respects, yes. What's really weird, this was something that had me scratching my head. They mentioned the Wolfman directly in a scene with David and what's her face
They
in
mention
bed.
it twice.
Yeah, yeah, but I'm drawing it to a particular instance. He asks her if she's ever seen the Wolfman. She says, "Is that the one with so and so?" I think she was
Arthur
alluding to him.
Reeve.
I assume that she was alluding to the Hammer Wolf werewolf movie, right? Uh,
I don't know. I didn't know what she was talking about. I'm gonna look that up real quick. Arthur. Go ahead and continue.
Anyway, but he proceeds to very very briefly describe the Wolfman to her, the Lon Chaney film, and he mentions the fact that Claude Rains is the one that kills Lon Chaney, and then he has this line where he says, "I think the werewolf has to be killed by somebody that loves by someone that loves or whatever," and from that moment on, I was pretty sure, oh, they're going to have her kill him in the end, like they're setting up this thing, she's going to be the one to kill him.
Right.
And
I
then
think
no,
he's right.
he just gets gunned down by a crowd. And even if they did have her kill him, it would have made sense either, because the werewolf at the beginning just got shot by some village people. So unless that entire town really loved that guy, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But even still, it felt like they were setting up something there that never paid off.
It was Oliver Reeve, and yes, it was a reference to the Hammer Wolfman. But yeah, that's a good point. The way I look at that now, I think he's just flirting with her in a weird, twisted way. And there's a lot of that in the movie where there's a lot of just twisted, dark humor that gets mixed in. And I think maybe what we're seeing here, as is the case a lot of the time in stuff like this, is we're just seeing maybe the movie or somebody's unsure about how much of this is supposed to be just played straight and taken seriously, and how much of it is supposed to be ironic and twisted on its head. And I think right there is maybe an example of it. But I don't know. That didn't jump out to me as a huge problem. What jumped out to me as maybe a bigger problem is David seems to know the Wolfman pretty closely there, but when Jack mentions the pentagram towards the beginning, David doesn't really seem to know what he's talking about. So maybe he refamiliarized himself with the Wolfman somehow after Jack mentioned it in The Slaughtered Lamb, but otherwise it seems like David was unfamiliar with Wolfman movies in that scene with Jack for the sake of that scene, and then for the sake of a later scene, he's suddenly like super nostalgic for them and remembers them well.
Perhaps.
There's some of that going on too. Oh, we were talking in general about how this is sort of a direct remake of the Wolfman, and you were saying how it sort of is, but
yeah. The only reason I bring that up is that I really liked that idea. I thought we were going to get basically the ending of The Fly, where Gina Davis has to kill Jeff Goldblum. Like, I really liked that idea, and then nothing came of it, and I thought it was kind of sad.
Well, it sort of seems like they start to. She runs up to him. He seems like he recognizes her and he's not going to hurt her, and then he's going to lunge at her, and then the cops just gun him down. So if she would have been better in that scene, I agree with you now that I'm thinking about it. Although I do like the way it plays. I'm conflicted. Okay, what you do there, though, to go with the idea you were saying, is you have her walk up, have exactly the same bit, except when he lunges at her, she pulls out a gun and shoots him. A gun that she had on her the whole time and was intending to use.
Yeah.
That probably would have been better there, now that I'm thinking about it.
Or maybe as she's walking down the alley, you can cut to her, like, pulling a gun out of her coat just in case, like she brought it to be on the safe side. And then when he lunges at her, she just shoots him,
Now, to be fair to her, although she doesn't get a lot of sympathy points from me throughout most of this movie, unfortunately. Again, I like her, but just as a person, I really question her ethics. Anyway, she doesn't know the extent at which he's actually a werewolf. I think when they actually drive up to the movie theater, do you think that there's any part of them that still thinks that he's just kind of gone crazy and he's just kind of running around on all fours? Maybe he's dressed himself up in some way. I really don't think that she had any idea what she was getting herself into until she laid eyes on him sitting in that corner, and then she was like, "Oh God."
until they actually see the thing in motion, I'm sure that a part of them was still choosing to believe that it was just him gone crazy.
Yeah, I think so too. So I
Even
don't
if
know if
the
I don't
reality,
buy that she would come in with a gun. I think that largely she was
but
planning to run in there and bring him down with her love and feminine wiles.
she might have though anyway, because whether or not he's a werewolf, it's pretty clear at that point that he's dangerous in some way, you know. And
I
I
don't
even
think
think
she
that
would have brought a gun. I think that she really. I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
and I think that perhaps subconsciously she had realized the truth, but it was more just like consciously denying it, until the very end.
Oh sure.
Uh,
I don't know what was going on. I feel like if she had been more sure that he was actually a werewolf, I would have totally bought her bringing a gun. But I genuinely think that up until that moment, she's still convinced that he was just running around on all fours, gone crazy, ripping people apart. I really think it took seeing him to go, oh, he's actually a monster and we have to kill him.
See, though, all of this discussion is academic because realistically, what you do to fix this aspect of the movie is just not have him bring up the idea of the werewolf having to be killed by somebody that loves them,
Mm.
because that just seems like setup that doesn't lead to anything. Just
Yeah.
don't have him say that line, and then you can have him gunned down by the police, and it's not a problem, you know? Because like I said, at the beginning of the movie, that werewolf in the town just gets shot by a bunch of the village people, so it doesn't really make sense that the werewolf has to get killed by somebody that loves them anyway. It just seemed like that was the direction that they were headed for the ending, and then they didn't. It was weird. It was a weird thing upon thinking back on the film after having what and I watched this twice this week for this review. I watched it once with and once without the commentary.
Did you
And
learn
so
anything major from the commentary?
I learned that a lot of the back and forth in the opening scene is actually a lot of that was improvised. Some of it wasn't in the script. A lot of it was just those two guys playing off of each other. So that was interesting.
That comes across a lot.
Yeah, I feel like there were other things that I learned, and now I can't bring them to mind. um, hmm.
Maybe more of them will come to you as we continue to talk. But
Yeah, maybe.
one other thing we were kind of getting at earlier is that if this is a direct remake of The Wolfman, Jack is Maliva, and he's also sort of Lawrence Talbot's brother in a sense. Because no, he's not really Lawrence Talbot's brother. I guess he's more like Bela because he's somebody who gets caught up and murdered in the tragedy of the werewolf. Oh no, fucking Gwen has that friend Jenny in the original Wolfman who gets killed by Bela's werewolf. That's who Jack is. Jack is that character, and he's Maliva. He's a little more than that as well. But thinking about this in Wolfman terms, that's who he is. And
I feel like there are a couple Malivas in this movie, though. I don't think it's all on one character. Like
that's
all of the
true.
towns,
That's true.
all
There's
of
all
the
the people in East Proctor as well. Yeah.
all of the townspeople are kind of Maliva as well, in a way. So
There's that one guy who's more concerned though, because again, they all sort of start to wake up throughout the movie. By all of them, I mean two of them. There's the barkeep at the beginning who convinces them to go out and help them and kills the werewolf. And then there's the guy later who actually gives Dr. Hirsch some dirt on what's going on and basically tells him, yeah, there's actually a werewolf, or at least convinces Dr. Hirsch that the town is convinced that there's actually a werewolf. So one thing I also want to ask you now that I'm thinking about the lore in general, one massive diversion from the Wolfman and many other versions. Doesn't matter if it's a silver bullet, you just got to kill the thing. That's all it takes. As long as it's a big enough bullet to take it down. How do you feel about that?
that's fine. I feel like they were going for a more realistic approach to the werewolf here, which is weird to say when you
Yeah,
have.
it's odd. I don't know if that approach really makes sense with this material, but I like it. I still like it.
If it wasn't for Ghost Friend coming to visit every now and then maybe I could be like, all right, well, clearly there must be some scientific explanation behind all this.
Right,
This is
yeah,
obviously-
it would be more scientific. But again, I think the ambiguity of Jack coming and going, being crazy, helps that out a little bit.
Yeah, perhaps. Although, how would he have even known with the people
Okay,
the other people
that in
he
that
murdered.
sense, yeah, that scene it doesn't make sense. But that, as you mentioned, that scene is also it's more over the top than anything else in the rest of the movie. So I don't know.
There,
It's questionable still.
there are two scenes in this movie where it goes full on comedy, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is a horror film. One is that, and the other one is the zoo sequence. Uh,
That's really
um,
funny though. When he says if there's any calls, take a message. That's really funny.
uh,
Oh, there's some killer stuff in this movie. Sense of humor
Yep,
wise.
with the wolves and whatnot. Now that I think about it, I feel like there are some moments in that British show Being Human that I like that are calling back to this movie because there's a couple instances I can think of the werewolf character George waking up naked in like some weird situation, like waking up in the forest with a dead deer torn to pieces or something. I
Mm.
feel like all that is sort of calling back to this movie in a way that I didn't think of until now. It's
Well, there's
interesting.
that really iconic moment where David stalks the deer naked in the woods and then he rips it apart, which I think Wolf also ripped off later on.
Yeah, but that's just another dream sequence.
Right, right. No, it doesn't actually happen, but
A lot
I'm
of
just
dream
saying
sequences, a lot of dream sequences in this movie, and I like the fact that they don't. You can tell they're supposed to be dream sequences, but
yeah.
there's no effect. Like the screen doesn't go all fuzzy, and then you're in a dream sequence. Like the dream sequence, like they're just cut into the movie as if they're a thing that's actually happening, and only after they're over do you say, "Oh, that must have been a dream." I liked that. I liked that they didn't have to telegraph this is a dream.
Well,
Like a lot of
they did that so that way the ambiguity of whether or not he's going crazy works better. So that way when you have Jack coming in later and Jack would just disappear as soon as anybody else came into the room, it works exactly the same as David's dreams. So
the only one that right off the bat is a dream is the one with the wolf Nazis. Just because right
yeah.
before he goes, well, just because even before the wolf Nazis burst in, I mean, obviously that's a dream, but even before they burst in, when it's just him and his family sitting around in his house, it's clearly a dream sequence just because the scene right before it was the fucking nurse reading him a story to help him go to sleep. So it's the only time that they really set up a dream is coming and then give you a dream. The rest of them,
It's just what the dream is that's really the shock there. I think that's why that works so well. Is they're like, okay, well we know it's a dream, but what's so he gets up, he gets to the door. Okay, who's at the door? Fucking werewolf Nazis. That's
yeah,
great. It's so good.
there's also a great subtle way to communicate the fact that the character is Jewish as well. I mean, the one nurse earlier in the film suggested that he was Jewish because she had had a look, but
Right.
but in America that doesn't always that's not always the way to find out.
Right.
But yeah,
usually they still come sealed.
but wolf Nazis.
That was
That might be the most surreal moment in the movie.
yeah, that's the really like experimental film stuff. I mean, yeah, I think that is you're right. I think that is potentially a subtle way to evoke the Judaism. But I also think part of it is a reference to the Wolfman. Because remember, the Wolfman
To Nazi.
well, yeah, because remember the Wolfman had some Nazism going on in its inspiration. The whole idea was that Kurt Siodmak, the writer, he felt that his fellow Germans who were turning against the Jewish and all the other people who were cast out by the Nazis had turned into wolves and had abandoned their humanity and were losing their humanity but not really realizing it. And that's
Right.
that's some of the stuff that he was playing with the Wolfman and what Lawrence was going through, and also in how some of the people react to Lawrence after he
Interesting.
becomes the Wolfman.
That's literally the exact same thing that inspired uh what's his name? Philip K. Dick when he wrote Android's Dream of Electric Sheep.
Yeah, I thought of that when we talked about Blade Runner a few weeks back.
Yeah, same thing. Anyway, yeah, that could be it. I don't know. That's something you'd have to ask John Landis about, though. 'Cause
Yeah,
who
well,
knows
but
if
I
he-
think there's a bunch of stuff going on there. But I think above all else, it's just surreal imagery, isn't it? And it evokes a lot of themes, and that's
my
just
only
good
question,
enough.
My only question, as far as that interpretation goes, is we obviously know what Kurt Siodmak was thinking of when he wrote The Wolfman, because we have like all the DVDs and Blu-rays and tons of special features and shit.
Right.
Did John Landis in 1981 know that? And that would be my only question.
I
But
imagine so. I don't know for sure. Maybe not. But I would
I mean,
imagine he would.
he could have read it in Famous Monsters. Who knows? Uh,
Yeah, he was into all that stuff, so I would imagine so. But I could be wrong. Uh, but I don't think it's important. I think that imagery is just very evocative. And wolves
Definitely.
and Nazis go together very well. You know, and werewolves and monsters and gothic imagery and Nazis just go together very well. It's all part of cliche horror, you know? And by
Yeah.
cliche, I don't mean like mediocre or bad. I just mean iconic, archetypical stuff, you know, stuff that is icons of the macabre, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like all of that is reflected in that dream scene. I think what it is more than anything else, I don't think that's part of the supernatural stuff. Or it's David's body responding to it, and one way that he responds to the evil stuff going on, him turning into a werewolf, is his mind conjures up all these images of horrible Nazis. I mean, the real thematic stuff going on there is the Nazis come in and they murder his family and Alex. So the idea there is that what's happening to David is not just going to affect him, it's going to affect everybody else in his life, and that's probably why he should kill himself. That's the idea there. That's the thematic crux. So whatever the Nazis actually represent more abstractly doesn't really matter. That's all kind of academic, as you said earlier. It's more about, hey, David, everybody in your life is going to get killed because you're a werewolf, whether you like it or not.
The other dream sequence I really like is the one where he's running through the forest again, but this time he's not naked, and he sees himself in the hospital bed, and then we get like what might be the only jump scare in the movie. I don't remember where the again almost vampiric makeup in that one shot, and I liked that because what that was evoking to me was him being a stranger in his own body. You know, he's not in the hospital bed. The wolf is in the hospital bed, and he's helpless. He's on the sidelines watching. And I would have to imagine that
Yeah.
if I would have to imagine that if that dream sequence continued, it would probably entail the nurse meeting an unhappy end right there. You know,
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask you, what do you think the idea there is? But I think you're absolutely right in your interpretation. He feels uncomfortable in his own skin. He feels like he's lost control of his life, and now he just feels like he's a passenger in his destiny. You know, things have been taken out of his hands, and he's scared by that.
it's literally an out of body experience, which is what turning into the werewolf is. It's very Cronenbergy, you know.
And I think the transformation scene, which we still have to talk about in detail, is a perfect outline of that. But one last thing about that particular dream, I like that it is very vampiric, but I just think it's more traditional Wolfman, or not even Wolfman, but just traditional werewolf makeup in general, because it's prosthetics on the face and not a full monster puppet. You know, so I think it's just evoking those classic notions that David is probably thinking of in his mind after everything that happened in East Proctor.
Yeah, I think the reason it made me think vampire is it's very similar to the vampire makeup from Salem's Lot, the miniseries.
Well, I think because there's no hair on it, you're absolutely right. There is a vampiric impression, but I think it's just in general a reference to prosthetic monster makeup.
Yeah, because the vampire makeup in that movie is sort of similar. You know, the sort of pale blue tint to the skin, the sort of shiny quality in the eyes, and of course the fangs.
One last thing before we talk about. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's very similar, and in any case, very striking.
It's a jump scare that works, ain't it? Let me ask you if this is a jump scare. When we cut to the shot of the werewolf's face before it kills the homeless guys, you know, we don't see it kill the homeless guys, but do you think that qualifies as a jump scare? And then when the train comes shooting past in that cut that I mentioned earlier?
Maybe, yeah, maybe. I'm sure.
I think it's debatable because of the way it's cut, ain't it?
You know, now that I think about it, there's definitely more than one jump scare in this movie. It's just that was the only one that I can think of. The other one that just jumped to mind is obviously when they get attacked by the werewolf at the beginning of the movie. There's a jump scare right at the beginning. They're walking around, he falls down on the ground, and then fuck, what was his name again? Jack. Jack goes to help him up, and then the wolf jumps out of nowhere and
Yep.
tackles him to the ground. It's a literal jump scare. Um,
Did you notice that the werewolf design is different on the two werewolves?
yeah, I like that.
I like that a
Different
lot. That's great. Uh,
individual.
David
I
looks
also like
way cooler, but the because the other werewolf looks more bear-like. But that was the idea, and it's he's bulky and imposing.
I also like that the three wolf Nazis all have different masks as well.
The
In
special,
various stages of wolfiness. One of them just looks like a super ugly dude. The other one has like way oversized fangs, and then the third one is the most traditional looking werewolf.
yeah, there is
With the,
kind of like a teenage werewolf-looking one.
yeah,
Uh,
the fur, 9 yards.
so before we move away from this section and talk more about the special effects, I wanted to ask you. I wanted to talk about. There's a moment where Alex is reading to him, and she's reading a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
Yeah.
I guess
That's something else in the commentary. Apparently, that's a favorite book of John Landis's. It's something that John Landis always wanted to make into a movie, but I guess never did. And obviously, it's the inspiration for the title of this film.
right. Well, I was wondering. I kind of wish I could have read this book before doing this podcast because I want to know if there's any thematic stuff that kind of crosses over. Like, is there any ideas there with the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court? Like, what happens to him that David kind of is like any parallels to what happens to David, or any parallels to being afflicted with werewolfism or whatever the hell happens to that guy in that story? You know what I mean?
I don't know. I've never read a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. I wouldn't imagine that there's too much similarity, just because one of them is a horror film and the other one is a like a weird time travel story about a Confederate Yankee who gets transported to King Arthur's Court. One is very fanciful and kind of sci-fi, and the other one is like dark and horrific, but also funny.
Xenophobia, I guess, though, is the line there, and trauma after being displaced from your usual your usual location. I guess that's the idea.
If anything, I would imagine that perhaps there might be, I don't know, there might be some very general like plot structure similarities. Perhaps, I don't know. That would be something you'd have to read the book to find out, I guess.
Yeah, like I said, I kind of wish I could have done that, but I didn't. But in its relation to the title, I think it's cool. It's a great title, An American Werewolf in London, even though it's long and it's oddly specific. It works. It kind of rolls off the tongue. You go like, oh, what are you watching? An American Werewolf in London, and you just go, oh fuck, all right, we're in.
What's it about?
It's like well, there's a werewolf. He's American, and he goes to London, and that literally describes the entire film.
Yeah, I miss movie titles that are just a short sentence that summarizes the plot. I was a teenage werewolf is another one.
Right.
I wonder what that one's about.
Back to the Future.
Back to the Future. Well, that one's a little bit more ambiguous.
Time travel.
A lot of old sci-fi movies. Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. I mean, that pretty much sums it up right there, doesn't it?
All the Godzilla versus movies. It's like, oh, this one's Godzilla versus Gigan. Guess what happens in this one?
Yeah.
Cockroaches try to take over the Earth. That's what happens in that movie. But yeah, so I like all that. Like, I think this movie is thematically very meaty, and I like that in my horror movies. This is not a film without substance. Would you agree there?
Certainly not.
And I think that's awesome. And I think that's why it's one of my favorite horror movies, that it's not a movie that's relying on, we're going to try and scare you or show you a lot of blood. We're going to try and like entertain you with a story and a narrative and characters and stuff that they go through and themes and ideas about humanity and what it means to live in modern society. Like, I love there's that moment where David goes channel surfing when he first is in Alex's crib. And it felt very like Dark Knight Returns, where you just see all these like, or very RoboCop, where you just see all these like super satirized versions of like British TV at the time. Like there's that one British celebrity who's like naughty Nina, who's like she I had many men, but I didn't regret one of them. I lived a dangerous life and it nearly destroyed me. Like it's clearly like a parody of like your, I don't even know, your Madonna or whoever, right?
Yeah.
I like all that. I like that. I felt like I was reading a comic book. I like all that Dark Knight Returns esque stuff.
Okay, so I just read a brief summary of a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, and it doesn't sound very similar to this at all. It's about a Connecticut Yankee. Obviously, he gets transported back in time to the King Arthur's court, and he uses his knowledge of the future and technology and things to make everybody think he's a wizard.
Oh, that's interesting. I will definitely have to read that. But I guess if I have to stretch, the similarity could come in where, he finds himself being very alienated, and once he's discovered, obviously he would not be welcomed. So I can still see some xenophobic trauma coming there. So, and I also imagine that he wouldn't really be able to relate with anybody. He would probably still be very lonely, like a wizard would be. Like a lizard, I said a lizard. A wizard or is always just characterized as being very solitary. So, anyway, it doesn't really have.
Oh, I just remembered. I also did learn that apparently this is a script that John Landis had for a long time. I think he said that he wrote it in like '69, and nobody wanted to make it at the time because they didn't really understand the concept of making a horror movie that was also funny. But apparently they liked it enough that it got him a lot of jobs, and then eventually he got around to making it himself.
Yeah, I'm glad that he waited, because I think that this just works the best in the early 80s. And the special effects were really there, So should we get to that?
Doing this in 1969 would have been weird. That would have only been a year after Planet of the Apes.
I mean, a Planet of the Apes era werewolf movie with a script like this, I would like, but not this movie. Because early 80s, Rick Baker, everything. I also feel like where we're at with social norms wise, the sense of humor is able to be darker, and it works better for the age.
I also don't know if you could get away with all the sex stuff.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I just think the material is probably better suited to the early 80s than it is to the late 60s. So anyway,
anybody who was alive in 1969, if you're listening to this, tell me, could you have gotten away with the sex stuff?
I mean, in 1969, presumably they got away with a lot of sex stuff.
One would think.
Anyway, so Dylan, this is probably the best looking werewolf in a movie, right? It is to me.
It's definitely the best werewolf transformation. I have some qualms with the werewolf itself.
With the design or the characterization?
I guess, but the head looks great. I've never really liked the four-legged werewolf approach, though. And apparently, this is something that John Landis insisted on. Rick Baker wanted to do a two-legged werewolf, a more traditional werewolf, and John Landis insisted on it being a four-legged werewolf. I think that goes back to him wanting to do a slightly more realistic take on the creature. And
I think it's
ultimately,
I think it's creepier.
Ultimately, you spend so much of the movie not getting to see the werewolf and, imagining the werewolf in your head and, oh, God, what's going on? You see maybe flashes of the werewolf, flashes of the face, which, again, looks great. But then when it's running around in whatever that British version of Times Square is called,
Piccadilly Circus.
Running around on all fours. Yeah, Piccadilly Circus. It's running around on all fours, and it's literally a guy behind it with a wheelbarrow while the guy in the werewolf suit is crawling around, and his legs are being held up by the wheelbarrow. It doesn't look all that great. And I don't know, my problem with the four-legged werewolf is ultimately like, it's less scary to me, because at that point I like the two-legged werewolf because it's in that middle ground between man and beast. It's what I like about the idea of a werewolf. Making it a four-legged werewolf, and it's basically just a really big dog, and it's like snapping at people's heels.
I mean, this is like a prehistoric throwback wolf kind of deal. That's what I like about it. Now,
you take this exact same werewolf head, though, and put it on a two-legged version of the suit. And to me, that's much scarier because I don't want
I don't even
I
know if
don't go
it's a
to
matter of being scary. I think just the special effects probably would have been better off. I
I
agree
don't,
with you on.
I don't go to a werewolf movie wanting to see a like I don't like werewolf movies where they literally just turn into like a dog
That I
either
agree
or,
with. Yeah, no, I
or
don't
like
like
they,
the just straight up wolf approach. I don't think that's what this is. I mean, it's not
no,
just a wolf.
but it's a stab in that direction.
Absolutely. Well,
Uh,
their approach there is it's a man becoming an animal. It's not a man becoming a half man, half animal. You know, I actually like that a little better with this material. Symbolically, I guess it's just more overt to to the ideas of we're dividing animalistic tendencies and more civil what we deem civilized tendencies. You know, but that's all very abstract. I just think this all comes down to personal taste. I think the four-legged werewolf in this context is scarier because it feels less human. That's what I like about it. I just think with this material, the less human he is when he becomes the werewolf, the more it works. If they actually got David Naughton running around on two legs and makeup, I feel like it would be less scary. I think because zero of David is in the werewolf, that just works better to me. You know,
to
because
me, it's the opposite problem of interestingly enough, Werewolf of London. Uh, in that movie, the werewolf makeup is very minimal, and he just looks. You know, you go too far in that direction, and he just looks like a really ugly dude. You go too far in this direction, and it just looks like a really fucked up like mutant dog. I like somewhere in the middle. That's I feel like the two-legged wolf, the type of wolf that you see most often now. You know, a lot of people don't really go for the you know what I'm talking about, like the kind
I
of
get, yeah,
werewolves you
no,
see
like the underworld Van Helsing approach.
Underworld or Van Helsing, that whole thing, you know, that sort of tact with the
I get
werewolf
it.
design
I just
is the
think with
most.
this material, the four-legged approach is the way to go. I just think it works better with what they're going for. And again, I just think with the cinematography and the way they set up the concept, it just comes off as scarier to me. But I think it's just a personal preference. Um,
I do have a question about the transformation scene though.
yes,
What the fuck happens to David's penis? It just
probably gets
at
covered.
a certain point.
We never see that area. We don't. It could be still hanging there.
I don't know, but I saw. I guess it was a production still I saw of like the whole thing, and I was like, what happened to his penis?
We only get the whole thing for like 2 seconds at the very end. And I will agree with you that it shows the limits of the effects. And that was where they really made the creative choice in making it four legs. Because if it was a two-legged design, they could have shown it a lot more. I think going the four-legged approach forced them to go to do sort of a Jaws thing with it. And that's what I really like about it. But when
I like the fact that we don't see it that much.
yeah.
But I also think that you could maybe see it a tad more, you know, like not a whole lot more. I don't want to like pepper all throughout the movie, but just a touch more. We could, you
Right,
know.
and I think that would have been why you would make it a two-legged design, so that way we could. Because as it stands, I think we got about as much as we can.
Because like I was saying,
to not push the effects to a ridiculous point where because we can't push it to where we have to do stop motion. I don't think that works with this material.
Because like I was saying, at the end of the movie, when it's running around Piccadilly Circus, that's when it's at its worst. It's when we're seeing the most of it. Because again, it's literally just this really cool looking werewolf, like animatronic, a dude in the suit, and behind him like a dude carrying his legs on a wheelbarrow.
Yeah.
So that you can get four-legged motion. And it doesn't look all that convincing. You can kind of tell that his back legs aren't touching the ground. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I never knew that, but the fact that I know exactly the shot you're talking about and the way you just described that, I totally get it. I can see it in my head.
Yeah. It's the gait is very unnatural, and the reason is because his back legs aren't actually touching the ground.
Right,
There's
right.
nothing. It's like one of those races that kids do, where like one kid stands behind the other kid and holds his legs. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
That's literally what they're doing.
It's like a human lawnmower. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I see what you're saying. But I think they made a choice and they had to stick with it, and I like the way they stuck with it, but I can definitely see where you're coming from.
But the transformation sequence though itself.
Yeah, let's talk about that because I think that's really because that's what everybody remembers this for. I think there's so much more to this movie than just the transformation scene. But yeah, the transformation scene is really impressive.
Well, it's probably, even if I would, even though I have my qualms with the finished werewolf design, definitely the best transformation sequence I've ever seen in a
Yes.
werewolf movie. I don't think there's any doubt about that. One of the entire reasons behind making this movie, from what I could tell, is that John Landis was always annoyed by, the sort of just crossfade that you would get in old.
Right. Yeah, the Wolfman never really got to get there with their transformation scenes. They always had the one in Frankenstein meets the Wolfman is the best, and then all the rest of them are super problematic.
But his point was that he wanted it to be painful, and he wanted you to get the fact that it was painful, and he definitely got that across.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the bit where you really realize that we're not the David's not really the one who's going to be running around killing people. He's transforming into a horrible evil thing, and it's super unnatural and gross and monstrous. And there's this clear moment where he switches over. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where initially when he's transforming, it's kind of like it's almost like an illness taking shape, Like it's him super in pain and this horrible thing is happening to his body. But then at a certain point, so much of the werewolf has taken shape. David's eyes turn brown and the snout shoots out. And at that point, he's just growling and then he's just in monster mode. I really liked the gradual shift there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I thought that was
think
cool.
about it. Now that I really think about this is another area that being human was copying this film. Because there's a moment somewhere, I don't remember where it was, where George, again, who is the main werewolf character in the series, basically describes in great detail how fucking painful the transformation is.
Right.
And it's almost like a verbal version of what we saw in this movie. Now that I think about it,
Yeah, because they didn't have the budget to do this, where you can have a man explode on camera.
well, there are some pretty decent transformation scenes in that show. Actually,
I don't doubt it, but you can't do one this
you don't ever
extended
get
and
to
in
see
detail.
you don't ever get to see a lot of it usually, and it's a little bit more like BBC CG than it is like actual practical stuff for obvious reasons. But the pain idea is there. It's the
Right. Like I said, they just don't have the budget to really take a good long look at it like this movie does, which I think is why it sticks out so much. Because
you know what we should do, Bill? Next year for our Halloween thing, we should have you watch that show finally, and we can talk about it at length because
I'd like to do. Yeah, we can do that. I'm down.
There's a lot of interesting material there.
Totally. I really like the moment where David's crawling on the ground and he goes, "I didn't mean to call you a meatloaf, Jack," because at that point he sort of feels like, well, Jack's only doing this because Jack's doing this to me because I doubted him, and he's taking this out on me in this moment. Or maybe he's just going, well, I didn't mean to be mean to Jack there when he was just trying to be truthful with me and help me out. I don't know. I really like that moment. I thought it was a nice bit of human levity in a horrible moment, in a moment where somebody's going through this terrible, painful thing. But there's a lot of that throughout the entire film. Just subtle little bits of humor tucked in to dark, traumatic shit. But yeah, I mean, just in general, it's a great sequence, and even they really shorten it when he turns into the werewolf again in the movie theater. But even that's effective because then there's that quick kill of the guy in the movie theater,
Right.
So that works out really well. What's your favorite kill? Because that's another thing. That's one of the other reasons that this stands out so well in the history of werewolf and horror movies is because the kills are amazing.
Favorite kill.
For me, it's definitely the guy in the subway. That stuck out to me as an iconic monster movie chase since I was a kid. That's my favorite, probably my favorite, like horror movie chase. I just think it's so creatively shot.
That's probably the most memorable, certainly. Um, I would also say just that at the very beginning when Jack gets killed, it's a pretty good scene.
Absolutely.
'Cause when he gets torn to pieces.
I like the way the end bit plays, where everybody in the movie theater dies. The guy goes in to check on it who works for the movie theater. He dies. The girl goes in to check. She sees the werewolf and runs out, gets the cops. The cop goes in. He looks. He gets killed. And it's... Oh, no, he doesn't get killed. He goes and runs out and he warns them. And it's just this chain of people getting killed by the werewolf and trying to prevent it. I really liked that. And then it builds up to the guy getting his head taken off. And that...
Oh, did you know that John Landis does a stunt during that scene?
No.
During all the car crashing and whatnot. Apparently, and I didn't know this, apparently before he was directing, he spent some time making his living as a stunt person, so he knew how to do it. But there's a scene where a car hits a guy and then he flies backwards through a glass like window, like a storefront.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I mentioned it before. Yep, I loved that bit.
He's got like a blue bandana on. That's Landis.
That's awesome. That was a moment that really stuck out to me. I love all that, all the collateral damage around the werewolf just by the sheer fact that it exists and is running into the middle of a busy street. Do you like that?
Yeah.
I think that's part of the dark comedy as well, because you're just kind of laughing at the sheer unbelievability of the whole thing and how it's almost like a cartoon when something happens and there's just a huge chain reaction.
That's a great scene, and I think that's why it stuck out to me how bad the werewolf actually looks in that scene.
Yeah.
It was like the one thing holding me back from being like, oh, it's fucking perfect. But
I don't think it's perfect, but I just think it works really well.
But everything going on around it is really well done there. I find.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right then. D, I am running out of directions to take us in. The one thing that I think we maybe kind of dipped out of discussing in full detail is maybe the werewolf lore. Is there anything in particular you wanted to say about that before we close out? Do you think that there's anything that they either missed out on not including or that they just kind of didn't do right?
Just that I like the idea of the werewolf being haunted by his victims.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not, the way that it's presented in this film, where they're like actually like physically in limbo and they can't rest in peace until he dies. That's good lore. But beyond that, just the general idea of the werewolf or vampire, really any kind of monster, being haunted by the spirits of the people they've killed is a brilliant idea, one that I think I've seen used since this, although I can't name any examples. And it's...
The Mummy from this year does that.
Does it?
Yes.
Interesting.
It's weird.
I'm sure that there are better examples.
Yeah, certainly.
But
this movie. What I also really like about that, I almost fell out of my chair. What I really like about that is it makes being a werewolf fucking hard. And you can't just be Lawrence Talbot or any number of werewolves just going about living a day-to-day life, because you're going to have all these people you've killed haunting you on a day-to-day basis, Mm-hmm. I think that's just another way to make it really hard and traumatic to be a werewolf. And
all of them were so great in that movie theater scene.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a great bit, because
real, because you're in a porno theater. There's like fucking titties all over the screen, and they're just having this fucking hilarious conversation about how he should kill himself.
Right. Well, I like how practical it is, because the bums are all like trying to get at him because they couldn't give a fuck about him. They hate him for what they did. Harry and Sally are all like, oh, whatever. We're just we're high on our undeath. And then you have the businessman who's very practical. He says, Mr. Goodman, he's your friend, but I I am a stranger. I am but a victim of your carnivorous lunar activities. Fucking killer delivery and series of lines by that guy. He's fucking great.
Also, another great title for a werewolf movie.
The carnivorous lunar activities, totally. Without a doubt. But what I was going to say was that I like how practical he is. He doesn't hate David. He just doesn't like the situation he's been put in, and he knows that it's David's fault and that he can solve it by getting rid of him. So I like that he's like, everybody stop giving him shit. Let's try and actually figure out how he can kill himself. Or at least try to mention a method to him that he'll actually buy and do, because that's what they want him to do. He suggests throwing himself in front of the tube, which I think is probably the smartest idea.
My question is, why doesn't he do any of those things? Like, it seems like after they have that conversation, he just sits in that theater until it gets nighttime. Like,
I don't know why the conversation lasts so long. That's interesting.
That was a really weird transition for me. I didn't know if they were sitting there talking that entire time, or if he like you cut and all of a sudden it's night and he's transforming. I'm like, what the fuck happened to him? Like,
yeah, there's a huge gap because the problem is he wakes up in the morning at the zoo. He gets back to Alex's place, and then he goes to the movie theater, and then suddenly it's nighttime. So there's a lot of hours missing there. There is kind of a consistent issue with time throughout the film in terms of like, we have to cut to night quicker because it's a werewolf movie, and that's when he'll turn into a werewolf. Like, even when he sees Alex to work off initially, and then he fucks around the house for a while, and then it's night. It's like, how long was he fucking around? How long has Alex been at work?
Yeah. Oh, I did like the bit in the phone booth where he does try to kill himself and he doesn't have the balls.
Yeah, where he calls his family and he talks to his little sister. Yeah, that was a good scene. I like that as well. Performance wise, that's nothing. Everybody's really good, and David Naughton, who plays David, is really good. David Kessler is his name.
I also really love Mommy, some naked American man stole my balloons. What?
Yep. It's one of my favorite lines in the entire movie. Yeah, there's just some killer comedy throughout this entire thing. When David's running around with the balloons, like as if the balloons are going to do anything and covering up his junk. That's all really great.
There was this weird moment, though, right after he grabs the kid's balloons and runs away, where it looks like the boy is, like, smiling. Like,
yeah, he wasn't a great child actor, but the way he delivered a naked American man stole my balloons, that's a great delivery. And also, another line he delivered well was when David's like, I'm the world-famous balloon thief. And he goes, why would a thief want to give me £2? And then David's like, I'll tell you why. He just walks out and grabs the balloons. That's great. I just liked that David woke up in the fucking wolf enclosure. The fact that his werewolf form decided, yep, that's where I need to be.
Now, of course, in America, a naked man in the bushes in a park offering to give little children pounds would be much more...
Do you think that's a scene that doesn't really hold up now? Like, you can't do that in a movie now. I don't even think it doesn't hold up. It's awkward if you show that to somebody who doesn't have historical context.
I think it's a problem of A, time, and also B, culture.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I don't think it's a problem with the film. I think it's a problem with the audience. You sick fucks. You can't just watch a naked American man steal a kid's balloons and enjoy the whimsy of it. It's all got to be fucked up and horrible. Anyway.
I saw this movie and I was like, wow, this is probably the most nudity I'll ever see in a movie this week. And then I saw Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, there's a lot of nudity in that. David is naked so often in this that I got desensitized to it. Like, when he turns into the werewolf and he's naked, I was like, I've seen him naked so many times now that it just doesn't matter to me anymore.
Yeah, I guess the first time is that dream sequence.
And it is the first time, yep.
And in that scene, it's a little bit shocking.
Yeah, it is. Which I guess it works best there. In that it should work best there because it's a dream scene, and it's supposed to be shocking to him.
God, that's another way that Being Human homages this movie. Now that I think about it, there's so much George running around with his hands cupped over his balls because he just woke up.
It would be a problem if you were a werewolf. You would never have any clothes.
It would be. He consistently throughout the show like will hide clothes in a location so that when he wakes up he can go and get them. Uh,
Mm,
there's a lot of interesting details in that show revolving around like how he deals with the transformations. Everything from like going out into the woods where hopefully he won't harm anyone to eventually at one point he buys a cage to lock himself in when he's going to transform.
right.
Uh, all kinds of shit like that. Anyway, but yeah, there's a bit of nudity in the film, so don't let your kids watch if you're a parent, I guess.
Even though mine did.
You know,
Don't be my parents.
there's some very fucking large tits in one scene, like
On who?
the fucking
Porn
the
actress?
yeah, the fucking chick in that porn, the fake
Well, yeah,
porn.
no shit.
Yeah, like distractingly so.
Distractingly so in a porn. I don't think you have a valid criticism here of that
Well,
woman's tits.
it's
It's
not
a,
even supposed to be a criticism. It wouldn't be distracting though if it was just a porn. It's distracting because it's a porn inside of a movie.
but it's a real porn in the context of the movie, so she would have big tits.
Also, apparently, it's a running joke in all of John Landis's movies. There's always a film called "See You Next Wednesday." That's on the
Is it
marquee.
always a porn?
No, but
That's
there's just always
awesome. That's great. I
there's
love
a
that the
film.
genre changes.
There's just always a film in the back. There's one. I don't even know what the movie's from, but I saw one screenshot of Jamie Lee Curtis, and there's just a poster on the wall behind her that says "See You Next Wednesday," and in that it looks like an old like '50s like adventure movie or something.
Yeah, it's a
It
vague
just
title, so I like that. I like that it can be misconstrued anyway.
it's like that. What's that thing that there's a word or a phrase or something that J.J. Abrams puts in all of his movies, and he actually made it the name of one of the ships in Star Trek. Fuck,
No idea.
I don't remember.
Well, if it comes to you, let me know.
It won't.
Great. But David, I called you David because we're reviewing this movie and because we know somebody named David. I apologize.
They'll never call me David.
Yeah, I was gonna say, given the David that we know, I'm sure you don't like that, but good.
I was mistaken for him once, and that was even worse because it was in person.
Oh, that's right. So yeah, you got a double whammy on that front.
I
But
can't think of
anyway,
any people that look more different from each other than.
that guy didn't even know what David looked like at that point, though.
That's true. That's true. I've brought this up before on the podcast, and he's always in the comments like, "I was the guy that did that. I'm sorry." It's fine.
Anyway, so
I don't,
Dylan,
I don't actually want to murder you and your family because you mistook me for David.
he's
Yeah.
lying. He's lying. Don't listen to him. Keep your doors
Well, not-
locked.
Not anymore.
Dylan McCandless, Super DM64, God's child. Do you have anything else that you would like to say about An American Werewolf in London?
That was certainly a film.
I do. The score is awesome. Elmer Bernstein does some good shit.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the soundtrack itself, all the songs, obviously killer. They all have Moon in them. Great. Bad Moon Rising, this is the iconic use of that. Until Kong Skull Island.
It wasn't anything that I remember that I walked away from the movie remembering. I mean, other than the songs that the actual songs that they use in the movie, like the 3 different versions of the Blue Moon and so on and so forth. But the actual film score wasn't anything that I walked out of the movie remembering or humming or anything. But I remember it being very effective.
There isn't a lot of it. There's some really quiet moments that work well, but when it comes in, it's always super effective. And I remember the score a lot because of how sparingly it's used, and when it's used well. That man, it's effectively old timey kind of horror movie while still effectively creepy for the modern age. But no, all the kill scenes being quiet is smart. The score creeps in when it's trying to be more of a kind of creepy, subtle atmosphere,
Yeah.
And there isn't something overtly scary on frame. I really like it when Alex is walking down the alleyway towards David as the werewolf, and then the music stops as soon as we see him.
Yeah.
I really like that. Uh, but yeah, no, all that's fucking great. Just like the rest of this movie. Like I said, dude, this is one of my favorite movies of all time. As I think we've addressed all of, it's got problems. It doesn't hold up completely. It's a movie of the time. If you don't have historical perspective, I don't know if it's going to work for you. Or more than that, outside of historical perspective, if you don't like this era, it's not going to work for you. It's a movie of the early 80s. I love the 80s in general. So this works for me on every level, partially because of that.
Yeah. And this was also just a good little time for horror movies, the early 80s.
Absolutely. And on that front, I think it's just one of the best horror movies. I think it's genuinely scary. It's genuinely funny. It's got a genuinely good story, genuinely dramatic characters. It's got problems on that front, as we mentioned. Alex, I don't know what the hell you're about, girl, but woof, you made a bad call. It ended badly for you.
I mean, sometimes you just need to take home a possibly homicidal stranger. I guess that's.
Do you think that she became a werewolf via sex, like in Cursed? You ever seen the movie Cursed, where
No,
werewolfism was an STD?
no, and no. I don't think she did because I mean it was still a full moon out the next night, so she should have turned into a werewolf too, shouldn't she have? Right? Like,
You're right. Yeah,
yeah. The only reason it took him a while is because he was in the hospital for like 3 months or whatever.
that wasn't 3 months.
They say a number of an amount of time, however long
It's a
it would have
number of
taken.
weeks. It's got to be a number of weeks.
Well, however long it would have taken to get to the next full moon cycle, I guess. But
Yeah, that's.
but
You know what? You're right. I didn't think about that. So it would have to at least be a month.
right, I'm not sure how the
Probably a
lunar.
little less. It's not always exactly a month. It's actually usually less. But even still,
So, so the 3 weeks figure is probably
yeah, it's probably about 3 weeks. That's what I would say.
yeah,
That makes sense to me.
what I would imagine anyway. But yeah, if we assume that the night he was attacked was the last night of the full moon, or if we assume that a werewolf won't transform when he's comatose, then it works. Uh,
Absolutely. Uh, just like the rest of this movie, it all works. It's a Halloween classic for me. I watch it every Halloween, just like I did this year. Uh, and I probably will again. It's a movie that I rewatch a lot. So, uh, I would say add it to your roster for yourself. But Dylan, any other things you want to add to your little wrap up here?
if you're interested in watching it for the Halloween season, and you don't own a physical copy of it, I'm pretty sure it's still on both Netflix and Hulu at the moment. If you have either of those, and if not, I mean it's piracy. You can find it.
Yeah, the International Space Satellite in Space. Excuse you.
Yes, yes.
A reliable source.
But, so yeah, go out and give it a watch. I think you'll find it to be if it doesn't blow you away, at the very least, I think you'll find it to be a very well-made um, horror film with some very impressive effects work of the period,
At the very least, I think elements of it will impress you.
and
And I think
also
a lot. It's a lot of elements, in my opinion.
a pretty solid script.
Yeah, I think it's a good script, good effects, uh, good comedic elements. Again, everything is balanced out, and I think that's why this movie, regardless of the things that are of super of the era, and I don't know if they work for a modern audience, I think it still holds up super well. So give it a go. If you like this kind of stuff, you absolutely should watch it because it's a super influential movie. So you should see where a lot of the modern werewolf tropes kind of start, because this is where they start. This and The Howling. And then later on, Buffy and everything kind of redefined it. So, but yeah. So that's An American Werewolf in London. Got out a lot of stuff there. I'm glad we finally got to review this movie. It's been a long time coming for me, but certainly was satisfied with it. But Dylan, we've only got one more week of Halloween reviews coming up. So, what are we going to be doing to wrap up the month of October here on DFOS?
Probably the most fitting way to wrap it up. How can we talk about horror films that revolve around the 1980s without touching on the slasher genre, which dominated the 80s? And we're going to go to pretty much the beginning of that trend. Not the first slasher film, but the one that certainly launched the phenomenon, and that is the original Halloween. But we are also going to talk about Halloween 2. We're going to do a double review. We're going to talk about the whole night of the Halloween Massacre of 1978. So come back for that. Listen to us talk about some Michael Myers in this bitch. I'm excited.
Listen to us figure out if another classic 80s horror movie holds up with Halloween 2.
Indeed.
So join us to discover that and many other things when we reassemble, just like the Frankenstein monster, next week. Until then, I'm Bill Worster, a.k.a. Zazubar.
I'm Super Doom 64.
Reminding you that it's a podcast, so you can't see us, Colonel Hogan.